Okay, yesterday we talked about, can you be good without God? And we said that really there are two different questions. Can your actions be good actions without God? And can you have good moral character without God? Questions are different questions, and they get different answers. The answer I proposed for can your actions be good actions without God is that if God does exist, and if God did create the world, and if God is managing the world, and you don't take those facts into account, then many of your actions are going to be bad actions. Not because you're morally deficient in any way or criminal in any way, it's just that, given the way the world is, your actions are going to be bad actions. Like, for example, doctors who used to bleed people who have fevers, thinking that reducing blood pressure is a way to help relieve the symptoms of fevers. And we don't do that anymore. And the reason we don't do it anymore is because it doesn't work and it's bad for you generally. Those doctors were good guys, many of them. They were well educated for their time. They were very dedicated to practicing medicine in the most responsible way, but they were hurting people. So their actions were in fact bad actions, even though they had good moral character. It's like that for a great deal of your life. When you decide to do something, you're resting your decision on two foundations. One is what are good, right, and just, and appropriate things to try to accomplish. And number two, where am I sitting? What's going on? What, in fact, will be the thing that will do the most good or do the least harm? And if you're ignorant as to the facts of your world, then a lot of your actions are going to go astray. You'll be trying to do the good, but in fact, they won't be good. So, ignoring facts about God is not going to, it's going to damage your ability to act well, to act rightly, to act goodly. And therefore, at the very least, you ought to check out and find out what the facts are. Because if you ignore it, you're taking the chance of going very largely wrong. That's what we said about actions. And about moral character, we said it is possible to be a morally good person without any religious connection. I think there are people who qualify for that title. But it's much harder and much less probable. And one of the reasons why it's much harder, it's much less probable, is that your culture, your values, your priorities, your education, your upbringing, the examples that you look up to have an effect on the kind of person you become. It's not something which is detached from your environment. And just as having a very deficient environment, poverty, drugs, violence, crime, broken families, and so forth and so on, leads a person to develop a character that is deficient in morality, so an environment which has good examples and stability and teaches people to be self-reflective, to think about their performance and how it is and how they could improve it, to try to change mistakes that they've made. That cultural emphasis is going to have an effect on the people's development so that they will, in fact, develop better character. So if you will take, for example, a culture like traditional Judaism and compare it with secular American culture, you would expect that moral performance among religious Jews will be superior to moral performance among secular Americans because Judaism cares more about that, teaches it, it gives examples of it, penalizes people who fail at it. Just like, and I gave this example yesterday, alcoholism, the Jewish cultural attitude towards being an alcoholic is just one of disgust. And therefore there are far fewer alcoholics in a traditional Jewish population than there are in the secular population, where getting drunk anyway, for many people, not only not disgusting, but it's a badge of pride. People boast about it. People invite people and, BYOB, bring your own bottle because we haven't got enough bottles for you. Or like I heard an advertisement here in this country, which really disappointed me. When you go out with your friends, give your keys to somebody else. Why? Because you drove there in your car, and you're for sure going to get drunk, and you don't want to drive home drunk. So give your keys to somebody else. That's a public service advertisement in Israeli radio. At least it was. The presumption, the natural assumption, with no critique, of course you're going to get drunk. That's what people do. That's just acceptable. That's an entirely different culture. And therefore, because it's looked down on in Jewish culture, therefore you have very, very few alcoholics. There are more than we would like. That's true. And maybe over the last 10 or 15 years it's been increasing. But if it's increasing from 2% to 4%, that's not 25%. So that's the answer with respect to moral character. It's possible, but it's harder and less likely to be achieved. Those are the two things that we said yesterday. Any questions about what we said yesterday? Okay, today I want to introduce a problem, which is a classical philosophical problem. The truth is, what I just told you and what I said yesterday contain really the ingredients for solving the problem. But since it's a famous problem and it can be stated easily, let's see this as an application. The name of the problem is the Yeshivat Ohr. This is a dialogue that was penned by Plato, and the key question is this. Now, he was a polytheist. He believed in lots of gods. And the gods have programs and preferences, and they fight wars and do all sorts of things. And they preach to people what they should do. Let's suppose, as just an assumption, so we can get the discussion started, let's suppose that what the gods tell people to do, in fact, happens to be the right, the good, the just, and appropriate things to do. Let's say that they're the same. How did they get to be the same? Is it that some things to do are right and good and just and appropriate in and of themselves? That's the way they are. And the gods love what's right. The gods love what's good. The gods love what's just. The gods love what's appropriate. And that's why they tell you to do what you do. They are the same, what the gods want and what's right, are the same because the gods, when they tell you to do something, copy it from what's really right, what's really good, what's really just. The gods are just repeating to you the things which on their own, independently, are good, right, just, and appropriate. That's one possibility. Or the other possibility is, no. When the gods tell you to do something, they make it right. They make it good. They make it just. They make it appropriate. Their saying so is why it's just. Their saying so is what the justice is, because they said so. Without the God saying so, nothing would have any character. Nothing would be right or wrong, or good or evil. Is it that the rightness makes the God say it, or is it the God saying it that makes it right? Which way is it? Now, Plato has a way of showing that both of these are unsatisfactory alternatives, and therefore there's a real dilemma. I'm not going to copy some of the things he said about polytheism in his culture, but I'll give you some examples on both sides where I hope you can feel that something's really wrong here, because either one isn't simple to understand. Let's start with the idea that the God saying so, make it so. I think people who are trained within traditional Judaism would expect that to be the answer. Well, let's try a thought experiment. Suppose, for Plato, the gods, or for us, the Creator, would say, commit murder. Would that make it right? Because he said so? If you say yes, then let's see how far it goes. How about if he says, worship idols? How about if he said, don't worship me? How about if he said, torture a dog to death? Anything he says becomes right just because he says it. No limit to what he could say, what he could do. And if that's still puzzling, yeah, but why should there be any limits on God? Let me point out to you that the Jewish tradition doesn't accept this. When God tells Abraham that God is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham says, you're including the righteous people there? You can't do that. Hashofet kol haaretz yaseh mishpat. Shall the judge of the earth not do justice? God doesn't say back, Abraham, you failed philosophy 1. I'm God. When I say it, I make it right. No. He says, of course, I'm not going to kill the righteous. Of course, absolutely. King David says, Tamur uki tov Hashem. Taste and see that God is good. That doesn't mean look it up in the dictionary. Oh yeah, G-O-D, whatever he says is good. End of story. You can look at history, look at the way people live, look at the way things develop, and you'll see that God is really good. So we don't accept this idea that God can just say anything and make it right. The problem of why innocent people suffer is a real problem. The book of Job is dedicated to that problem. Who wrote the book of Job? Surprise, surprise, Moses. Moses wrote the book of Job. So says the Gemara Bava Basra. This problem is very old, why innocent people suffer. If you thought that God's moral authority is unlimited, there wouldn't be a problem. What do you mean? So what if they're innocent? God wants them to suffer, so they suffer, and that's right. No, there's a real problem there. So it isn't as if we would accept that God has unlimited moral authority to make anything right whatsoever. That's one problem. Another problem with the idea is this. What is it about God that gets you from God commanded it to it's right, it's good, it's just, it's moral? What about God guarantees that? How do you make that transition? And if you try out a few features, you'll see that it's not easy to make the transition. Let's say God's all-powerful. He can do whatever he wants. Therefore, when he says to do something, it becomes right. Might makes right. Because you're powerful, what you say in morality is correct. I don't think that's the transition that we acknowledge. We don't think the stronger a person is, the better his moral opinions are. Sometimes the worse they are. The fact that you're all-powerful doesn't give your moral, give you moral authority that your commandments are good commandments. What about he knows everything? He knows everything. Therefore, when he tells you to do something, it's the right thing to do. Do we see any particular connection between knowledge and right morality? The more knowledgeable people are, the better people they are. The more honest they are, the nicer they are. There's no obvious connection between knowledge and having moral authority. Now, there is an answer to the question, but the answer defeats the whole purpose. The answer is because God is good. God is just. God is morally perfect. Since God is morally perfect, when he tells us something, it's going to be the right thing to do. That's a fine answer, but then you have to judge that God's morally perfect before he starts to give commands. That's the background for listening to him. That's the background for trusting him. That means his commands can't create morality. Can't be right because he says so. I have to know that he's morally perfect before I listen to him. So this idea that what God commands becomes right because he says so, from our point of view, is a very difficult position to accept. Let's try it the other way. Let's say that what God says is right because he says the things that are right. They're right independently of God, and that's why he always gets it correct, because he copies what's independently right. That would mean that God has no moral authority at all. Nothing's correct because he says so. He's just a source of information. The encyclopedia doesn't make things right. It's just a book full of lots of things that are right, so you can live your life with the truth. That doesn't seem right. That God, the Creator, has no moral authority. His saying so carries no weight. That doesn't seem correct either. So either way you go, we have a position that's not really satisfactory. If you thought those were the only two possibilities, either A causes B or B causes A, you'd have a real dilemma. That's where Plato leaves it, that we have no good answer to this question. And this problem has been alive for 2,400 years. I think, leaning on what I told you before, that both alternatives are wrong. That's the third way, a middle way, a kind of compromise between the two of them, in which case you can have a situation that's satisfactory. Let me go back to what we said 20 minutes ago. When we were talking about actions, and we said your actions could be dreadfully wrong because you don't know the facts about the world. And I said your decisions rest on two pillars. What's morally right and what kind of world am I living in? Let me give you examples of where you look at a person and you think, oh, what he's doing is a crime, a criminal. And then you find out that because of his belief system, he's not a criminal, not cruel, he's not irresponsible, but his way of thinking what the world is like is what's behind it, and his morality is fine. Now, there's an example that's given in, I believe, in anthropology textbooks. I don't know if it's true or it was made up, but here's the example. There's supposed to be an Eskimo group where, at a certain age, children kill their parents. Boy, that sounds pretty drastic. Children kill their parents. Like, it's murder and your parents? So the natural thought is, these people are savages. They're inhuman. Then you find out that according to their religion, people have a soul, and the soul is eternal, it lives on forever, and the soul goes into eternity with the mental abilities that it has at the moment of death. And they're aware of the fact that when people get really old, sometimes they lose their mental abilities. So, in order to preserve a high quality eternity, they kill them early so they lose a few years of life to have a high quality eternity. Now, when you hear that, you think, wow, so they're not really primitive, they're not savages, they love their parents, and they're doing what's most responsible to benefit their parents in the best possible way. Maybe you don't agree with their religion, that's something else. You don't agree with their facts about the world. But their values turn out to be okay. This is very common when people visit other cultures. When certain anthropologists said that the cultures vary in their basic values and so forth and so on, they were often taken in by what they saw them do without asking, why are you doing it? Had they asked, they would have found out that the variation isn't based on values. Variation is based on a different view of how the world works. The pyramids in Egypt, which were the burial places of pharaohs and other great people, sometimes you found there weapons and food and clothes, even a boat. Why did they do that? Were they trying to create scarcity to drive up prices on the market? I mean, why would they put good materials into a place where a person's dead and it's going to sit there forever? Maybe some taboo in using his stuff, bad luck. No, they believe that the person will live again. And since he's going to live, he's going to need food, he'll need clothes, and he's going to take a journey across a river, so he needs a boat. They're preparing for the needs of this person when he's revived. When you hear that, you think, oh, so it isn't scarcity and it isn't taboo about, or some superstition about using it. It's providing for someone who you think is important materials that he will need. You have an entirely different picture of what the person is doing when you find out what facts he has going on in his head. And this is very important in history and anthropology. The places which describe actions that seem to be completely opposite to the way we would act, often, I would say usually, are the result not of different values, but a different picture of the world. Let's try this example. Did the Nazis, who set out to exterminate Jews, and then ultimately all non-whites, have different values from ours? Did they have different values from ours? first thought is they're cruel, selfish, they're just destroying everybody in their path. But then notice that with respect to Jews, they had to make up a story. Jews are evil. Jews control the monetary sources of the world. Jews control the communications of the world. Jews cost us the First World War in Germany. They're the reason we lost the First World War. They're evil, and they have oppressed us, and we're saving ourselves from our oppressors. Why did they make up that story? Because if you make up that story, you can use the old values. You're defending yourself against an enemy who's attacking and destroying you. That's the old values. Everybody will agree with that. Somebody's attacking you and destroying you, you should defend yourself. So in order to use the old values, they made up a story about what we were doing, which is a false story. But the need to make it up is because they're working with the old values. Same thing happened in North America. Come to North America, white settlers, and there are lots of creatures with 2 arms and 2 legs and red skins running around, and they have weapons, and they have organization, and they have land. and lots of land. And we want land. We want to expand from the sea to sea, shining sea, manifest destiny. We're going to inhabit the whole continent. But you can't steal. You can't steal. Oh. But 2-legged, 2-armed creatures with red skins aren't human. That'll do it. They're just animals. They're not human. No problem taking land from animals. So if you define them as not human, you get to take away their land without compromising your values. You just change the facts. This shows you how facts and values work together. And it also shows you that variation in values is much less common than you think. Because people, in order to justify using the same values you have, make up false facts which would justify their doing it. Okay, now let's take this hybrid, which this is absolutely uncontroversial, what I'm telling you. I don't think anybody would disagree with this. And let's think now, when you decide what to do, what's right to do, 2 things are going on in your head. What moral principles apply, and what are the facts that I'm living in? Maybe the principles are what you have independently of God. You are created in such a way that you know certain moral principles are correct. It's something you develop naturally through your experience because God created you that way. Just like you develop your ability to do math independently because you're created so that your experience in the world enables you to do that. And you imagine a person who goes into the makolet, to the grocery store. In the old days, you put down your items, he's writing them down, you add them up, and give you a sum, and you pay. And you look at the slip, and you look at the addition, and you say, listen, I'm sorry. Over here, you added 7 and 5 and got 14. That's not correct. 7 plus 5 is 12. So he looks at it, he says, are you religious? And maybe you say, not really. Well then, what right do you have to say 7 plus 5 is 12? Where's it written in the holy books? What rabbi taught you that? No? Well, who are you to say 7 plus 5 is 12? The answer is, think about it and you'll know it's true. even little kids know it. There's 7 of them, 5 of them. How many are they together? 12. Baruch Hu created us so that by our natural experience, our powers of thinking, we can know things about math just by ourselves. Of course, they're true because He made them, and we know them because He made us that way. But coming to know them, I do that by myself because He created me in such a way that I can know those things. Similarly, and this is a certain theme in contemporary philosophy, similarly, He created us in such a way that normal life experience leads a person to think. Causing pain to other people is something you want to avoid, unless you have some reasons that's necessary. Depriving other people of their property is something you want to avoid. Saving a life is something you want to do. Saving people from pain is something you want to do. These are things that you learn from experience, and you don't need God to reveal them to you. Or if you like, you can say he revealed them to you by creating you in such a way that you will come to see these things for yourself, just like he revealed mathematics to you because you see it for yourself. So, on the one hand, you do have independent access to moral rules, moral values, moral commitments, which you know because of the way that he created you. You don't need to be religious in order to have that. You may not know that he created you. You may not know that he made you that way, but you are that way, and your experience teaches it to you. But, as we said yesterday, God's existence and what he does creates a certain moral authority that he has, so that because of that moral authority, when he tells you to do something, you have an obligation to do it. So he does have moral authority. Take the example we said yesterday about gratitude. If someone benefits you, someone does something very good for you, you owe him something. If he asks you for help, you owe it to him. And let's say the example that I said yesterday, suppose somebody's drowning and somebody saves his life, pulls him out of the river, and then the guy who almost drowned gets a telephone call. I need your help. Yeah. Help? Sure. What is it? You saved my life. I need you to help paint my living room purple. I'm on my way. I have my brush. I'm ready to go. Suppose he had said, I need you to help me balance my checking account. Then you'd say, I'm on my way to help you balance your checking account. I have an open-ended, blank check obligation to him. I owe him. He can collect his debt in a variety of ways. There's a limit to how far he can go. We said that 20 minutes ago. But within those limits, any way he says pay the debt becomes a responsibility to pay it in that way. So he does have moral authority. When he says to do something, it does become an obligation to do it within the limits that he has of his moral authority. Same thing with ownership of property. Since he creates the world, he owns the world. And since he owns the world, he can decide how it should be used. When he says to Jews, don't eat pigs, what he's saying is, they're my pigs, and I'm not giving you permission to use them. To eat them. You can use them, but you can't eat them. So he does get moral authority by virtue of the fact that we have a moral relationship with him, and that moral relationship, those facts of how that relationship is constructed, give him the authority to determine certain types of things that we should do. And then when he gives us mitzvos, we are obligated to do those mitzvos because they're within his moral authority to do. That means we have a hybrid situation. It's not all good without God. It's not all good because God said so. The principles are good in and of themselves, and the practical application in many, many cases is because God said so. That's the hybrid view, which I think is the correct view, and I think it solves the problems. And it means that Euthyphro, when he said it's one or the other, when Plato said that, was being a little bit superficial. This doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a hybrid of the two views. Are we together so far? Mm-hmm. Okay, now, this has certain applications. You're learning Judaism. Some of you are just beginning to learn Judaism. If you learn a Jewish rule, and to your mind, there's something morally questionable about that rule, don't just dismiss it. Don't just say, well, I'll have to overcome it because God is God. No, push it. Because probably you haven't got the rule right. Probably you haven't got the rule right. I'll give you an example of a verse in the Torah, and the way the Talmud understands it, the way Tosfos understands the understanding. The verse in the Torah says the following. You own an ox, and Reuven owns an ox. Now, Reuven's ox gores your ox and kills it. What should we do about that? Well, the Torah says, sell Reuven's ox, sell the corpse of your ox, and divide the money. That's what you should do. Golly, let's see now. Let's apply that to some cases. Let's suppose that Reuven's ox is worth $1,000 alive, and your ox is worth $100 alive. Okay, his ox kills your ox. Sell both oxen. We have now $1,100. Sorry, because it was $100, so it becomes $50. We have $1,050. So each gets $525. You started with 100 and you now have 525. Boy, that's a good deal. Maybe you should sort of tie a red flag on the neck of your ox and then lead him in front of very expensive oxen and hope they gore him. That way you can make a lot of money. And the other way around, let's suppose that Reuben's ox is worth 100 and your ox was worth 1,000 and dead it's worth 500. So you sell the two, you have 600, and now Reuben walks away with 300. His ox killed your ox. He had an ox worth 100. He now has 300. He made $200 on it. That's a good deal. Says Reuben, all I have to do is find somebody else's ox that's really expensive and let my ox gore his ox, and I make a profit. That doesn't sound right. You know what the Talmud says? The verse only applies when the two live oxen are of equal value. They're of equal value. What then happens? Let's do it as a formula, kind of algebraic formula. Let's say that each ox is worth X. And when one ox gores the other one, the second ox value goes down from X to Y. Right? So what do? You sell X plus Y and divide it in half, and each one gets half of X and half of Y. If you think about it, what the victim ends up with is he ends up with half of his loss. He ends up with half of X because he had half of Y to start with, and now he gets half of X plus Y. That wasn't part of his loss, so therefore he ends up with half of X as his profit, as his remainder. In every case, you'll get what's called chatzi nezek. You'll get half the loss. That's the rule for unintentional animal damage. If the animal isn't known to be dangerous, and the owner of the animal didn't do anything to influence the animal, make it wild or spur it on, there's just the spontaneous action of an animal injuring something, damaging something, the payment he has to make is half the damage. So instead of reading the verse blind, that God told me, sell the two. Do what you were told. Don't think about it. Just obey. It's going to be unjust, and that's God's business. He's running the world. I don't have to think about that. No, as a matter of fact, you do have to think about it because that's not what God wants. How do you apply this? When do you apply this? To what extent do you apply this? There are differences in the Talmud and differences in the Rishonim as to what extent. But it's not irrelevant. Not a wrong thing to think. I'll give you one more example, which is very common. People hear that we have certain crimes which carry capital punishment. Capital punishment. I wonder what they administer that for. Murder? Well, maybe okay. Idol worship? Yeah, I can see from their point of view, worshiping idols is really important. Sabbath violation. Sabbath violation. Guy smoked a cigarette on Shabbos, and therefore you kill him? Isn't that a little extreme? Okay, it's not nice. Okay, God said not to do it, but golly, just for smoking a cigarette? The answer is, just for smoking a cigarette, he wouldn't die. That's not what the death penalty is for. Death penalty only applies when, as he's about to light up, Reuven and Shimon come around the bend and they say, what are you doing? It's Saturday, Shabbos, you can't do that. You'll die if you do that. And he has to say, thank you, gentlemen, for your information. I'm doing it anyway. Only then is the death penalty applied. Now let me ask you a question. Suppose what he wants is a cigarette. That's what he really wants. When Reuven and Shimon come around the bend and they say, you're going to die for that, what will he do if he really only wants a cigarette? He'll say, gee, thanks guys, I forgot all about it. I was so involved. You reminded me. You're so wonderful. You saved me from a total transgression. Have a nice day. And when they turn the corner, he'll light up a cigarette. That's if he wants a cigarette. He's not going to say, I'm going to do it anyway. What does he really want? If he says to them, I'm going to do it anyway. He wants a public anti-Shabbos demonstration. Aha! That's what he dies for. That doesn't sound so terrible anymore. It's not just wanting a cigarette. It's wanting to say in public, God is wrong, the Torah is wrong, you're all wrong. And that's the thing, something the Torah doesn't tolerate. So when your moral intuition tells you something's off base, you should ask it, because I would say 9 times out of 10, your moral intuition is right, and what you were told isn't exactly correct. Here's another one which is often asked. I'm only able to do part of it now, but at least the part helps. Don't we have a mitzvah to practice genocide against the people of Amalek? Doesn't the Torah tell us that we have to murder all people belonging to Amalek? Isn't that genocide? The answer is no. That's not what it says. Look at Maimonides' Laws of Kings and Their Wars, chapter 6, and he starts with the words, Ein osim milchama ba'adam sheba'olam, elim keim korin lo tchila l'shalom. You don't make war against anyone in the world unless you first offer him peace. You don't shoot people in the back because they're of Amalekite ancestry. First thing you say to him is, we offer you an arrangement of peace. If you accept it, everything's fine. If he refuses, then there's another way of then it requires war to settle it. But you don't kill people for their genetic inheritance. Therefore, it's not genocide. It's a cultural, moral, spiritual matter, but it's not genocide. So again, what you've learned, what you heard, when you apply it to the real world, doesn't apply in the way that you might have thought. How about Jews, or born Jews, but who don't practice the Torah? What's our attitude towards them? Well, it's a category called Tinok Shenishba. The words Tinok Shenishba mean literally a child who was abducted, which happened. Non-Jews stole Jewish children and brought them up as non-Jews, and sometimes they stole infants, and sometimes they stole 2-year-olds. And by the time that 2-year-old becomes 13, he probably doesn't remember anything of his life for the first 2 years, and all he knows is he's Christian or Muslim. He has no responsibility for what he has done and what he does. And if you come across him, you should treat him, Maimonides says, with love and sympathy, and try to bring him back gently to the Torah, because he's not responsible for what he does. And the same is true in cases, Maimonides says, which aren't as extreme as abduction, but take the Karaites. The Karaites created a heresy, that the oral tradition is phony, it was made up, and it didn't come from, ultimately from Moses and through a verifiable tradition. And therefore, their practices were very different from what we would call the Rabbinites, the ones who are faithful to the tradition. Those who invented it, knowing that they're inventing it, are criminals, and they should be punished. But, as Maimonides says, their children and grandchildren who grew up, and all they know about life is what they taught them. They don't know anything else. They should be treated like someone who's been kidnapped, and you talk to them, and you explain to them, and you try to influence them, and show them love and sympathy, because they're victims. I think that agrees with our moral intuition. Someone who has no access to the information, someone who has no access to better example, better training, isn't to be held responsible for the things that he does wrong. That's exactly correct. And that's exactly the Jewish position. I mentioned to some of you, we had a student here from Pittsburgh who came from a conservative family, and he was in the conservative synagogue's religious education program. And one day the teacher brought in a woman and said to the children, this woman is Orthodox, and you can ask her any questions that you have about Orthodoxy. So one child put up his hand and said, I understand there's fringes, strings, the Orthodox people tie in their garments. What's that? And she said, this was reported to me by the guy himself, she said, well, those are, it's written in the Torah. If you have a 4-cornered garment, you're supposed to put fringes on the garment. Nobody does that anymore. That's what she told them. So if you're sitting in that class, your teacher tells you she's Orthodox. She herself presents herself as Orthodox. And she says, nobody does that anymore. what are you supposed to think? Oh, no, she's lying? Why would you think that? How would you know that? So now he says, well, Orthodox is something in the past. People used to do it, but they don't do it anymore. And for me, I'm living in my world, not living in their world. Will he explore it? Not particularly. How could you hold him responsible for his failures when he was lied to? So I think that if your moral intuition tells you that something you read or hear is questionable, ask the question. Because 99 times out of 100, your moral intuition is right, and your understanding of what God wants is incorrect, or misled. Okay.